I'm Eric Reitz, and I am an anonymous web user. With my group, Rule 3 Productions, I've put together a documentary which will likely change the way you see the world and especially the United States government. When the project began, it was more about positive aspects of anonymous web communities. Through interviews and in light of recent events, the tone of this documentary shifted dramatically to highlight how the United States government spies on its own citizens, and also to tell the story of Noko, an anonymous web user who took sanctuary in anonymous web communities.
I definitely felt outcast from society, I suppose, and that led me to be more involved with the internet than anything else.
Noko and I first became a part of anonymous web communities when we were still teenagers, because we felt like there was no one in our lives that we could talk to that we really felt like we had a connection to. From a young age, we're expected to fit in. We're expected to act a certain way, to be a certain way, to feel a certain way. At what point do we determine that we will be who we want to be, to express ourselves exactly as we feel, and to associate with like-minded people? Does that point come when we feel outcast by society? Does that point come when we find that we can achieve these ends through anonymity online?
There are things that I believe, things that I do that, if exposed to the public, could greatly damage my reputation, my career, and my close relationships. If someone were to get a hold of such information, they could threaten or blackmail me with it. I'd be very reluctant to make such a person my enemy. Now, what if that person was the government? And what if that person knew things, not just about me, but about everybody?
People are under the impression that the internet is sort of anonymous by default. They don't know how many digital trails they're leaving behind.
Intelligence agencies have been secretly operating a broad data mining program that collected email, photos, and just about everything else from private communications from most Americans. That's according to the Washington Post and The Guardian. The Post says that Microsoft, Yahoo, Google, Facebook, AOL, Skype, YouTube, and Apple were all involved.
We only had the authorities to wiretap anyone, from you or your accountant to a federal judge to even the president if I had a personal email.
Emails, photos, video, audio, documents, connection logs, everything.
First of all, Piers, the databases that this program accesses is storing 40 billion internet records every 30 days, essentially trying to store into its systems all emails, all online chats, all internet browsing that it can possibly get its hands on. An incredible power to vest in the state. But then on top of that, the program is designed to, as it says, collect, quote, nearly everything a user does on the internet. So it allows an analyst sitting at his or her desk with no oversight, nobody watching over their shoulder, be able to enter an email address, enter an IP address, use keywords, and then pull up the content of emails, people's browsing history, what websites they've gone to, what Google searches they've entered, what kind of Microsoft Word documents they've sent, essentially the entire range of activities that people engage in on the internet. It's intended to be a ubiquitous spying tool.
I started getting an interest for privacy from the amount of time I spent online. The internet was just a buzz about it. What became a real issue was the amount of surveillance that was becoming prevalent.
I mean, what has been going on here in the name of terrorism investigation is so all-encompassing. It almost embraces every single aspect of every American's life online.
James Sensenbrenner, who is a Republican, very conservative Republican, who is the author of the Patriot Act, says this goes well beyond what he and others anticipated the Patriot Act to be used for.
The way most of the military has been privatized, they're beginning to privatize the spying apparatus. So not only does the government have access to all of this information, but they've outsourced it to this private company, Abraxas, which isn't bound even by the constitutional restrictions the government has. So they can flout the Fourth Amendment with impunity. They're not subject to Freedom of Information Act requests. Any of the normal protections we'd have against the government, they've now outsourced, and so we don't have any of them at all.
I would call it is the single biggest infringement on American civil liberties probably of all time, isn't it?
In my mind, there is absolutely no correlation between government surveillance and the safety of that government's citizens. But I'm certain that a government who can spy on every one of its citizens is a much greater threat than any terrorist organization.
I think he's a traitor. I think he has committed crimes, in effect, by violating the agreements, given the position he had.
If I had just wanted to harm the U.S., that you could shut down the surveillance system in an afternoon. But that's not my intention, and I think for anyone making that argument, they need to think, if they were in my position, and you live a privileged life, you're living in Hawaii in paradise and making a ton of money, what would it take to make you leave everything behind?
Does publicizing information about a government's unlawful behavior mean that there is that somehow or the other is an act that can contribute to terrorism? If you had that as your argument, then governments would always be able to hide evidence of their unlawful behavior by saying somehow or the other this could be used by enemies of the state.
Can you believe in freedom and boast about fighting for freedom when you have secret courts, secret operations like PRISM, secret investigations which go into every spit and cough of every American's lives without any member of the American public knowing about it? That's not freedom, is it?
The American public is entitled to know when the popularly elected government is doing the opposite of what it has sworn to do: uphold the Constitution and preserve our freedoms.
Reddit, for instance, has a large system of just whistleblowing, various subreddits that do nothing but call out the corruption that is prevalent in leadership in this country.
I will also hold myself, as president, to a new standard of openness. Transparency and the rule of law will be the touchstones of this presidency.
We live in a world of rapidly deteriorating government accountability and transparency. It's clear that in the United States, at least, the government aims to achieve its own ends in secrecy, without accountability to its people, and in a way that is disgraceful to the Constitution which founded our country.
Just make it totally government controlled. I'm sure it'll work real well. I'm sure you'll get a completely happy society, and everyone will be completely fine with just never saying anything that they think out loud. And yeah, it'll be a prosperous society where there'll be lots of money for maybe at least the people on top, until everyone gets so angry they just quit even trying to live,
So then, do we live in a surveillance state?
Technology means that we're going to be living in a surveillance state. That's just going to happen. But there are different kinds of surveillance states. You can have a democratic surveillance state which collects as little data as possible and tells you as much as possible about what it's doing. Or you can have an authoritarian surveillance state which collects as much as possible and tells the public as little as possible. And we are kind of on the authoritarian side.
Why should people care about surveillance?
Because even if you're not doing anything wrong, you're being watched and recorded. And the storage capability of these systems increases every year consistently by orders of magnitude, to where it's getting to the point you don't have to have done anything wrong. You simply have to eventually fall under suspicion from somebody, even by a wrong call. And then they can use the system to go back in time and scrutinize every decision you've ever made.
It's clear that protecting your identity and your information from government surveillance are more important now than they've ever been. But many people don't know where to find helpful resources online.
Tor bills itself as an online anonymity tool that allows you to browse the internet, interact online without being traceable.
We exist to give ordinary people control over their information. We exist to sort of restore the balance of power between the powerless and the powerful.
When you search at DuckDuckGo, we literally don't save the information about your computer that you send to us. So there's no way to tie your searches to you or even to tie your searches together.
So the reason anonymous web communities have been the source of ultimate freedom is because everyone can organize in a fashion never quite before seen, and they'll be able to permit freedom in the outside world, in the physical world. Because that's the thing, you can't be threatened by this sort of stuff. First of all, your location is generally pretty easy to find without even a warrant, for instance. So what you would want to do is make your location more difficult by relaying proxies. Tor is usually the popular way to do that, though there's other programs as well. When you send an email, expect that it will get logged. So if you don't want your email being read, you should be using a public key encryption service. It might be important to encrypt even your hard drive itself. TrueCrypt is a good program for that.